I'm Steve Novosad from HNTB. I'm Associate Vice President here, but more importantly, I am the Technical System Lead for the PIA Tampa pilot that's going on here in the Tampa area. We're one of the 3 pilots that are doing the V2I piloting for USDOT. The other 2, as you probably know, are New York and Wyoming. So today what I was going to talk to you a little bit about is SCMS and why it's important and why we need to get going. So our topics are going to be, as you can see, we'll talk about kind of what the purpose of an SCMS is, what we would like to see an SCMS do, but maybe where reality is going to become, how does an SCMS function, why does SPaT need SCMS. We'll talk about application certificates and enrollment certificates. We'll talk about some limitations, and then finally we'll wrap it up with some protection and some earlier deployer ideas. So what is the purpose of an SCMS? Well, as probably everybody knows, the real purpose is to establish security and trust as we broadcast these messages over the air. We want to ensure that a message that our devices are receiving are coming from a trusted source. And so the fact that we can receive that message and recognize that it comes from a trusted source, we can be confident in that we can use that message, decrypt it, and use it for whatever purposes we're looking at. The fact that the certificates timeout allows us to be able to not have to worry about credentials being tracked, because over time each of the certificates will time out, and you'll have to get a new batch of certificates. And really PII, in our world, there really is no PII per se, but if there is a vulnerability of some sort, it would be that somebody like a third party would somehow be able to correlate things, but the way that the system is set up with SCMS, as well as the security, as well as the way the messaging is set up, there's really no opportunity for PII to be compromised. So what would we like an SCMS to look like? And this is, we would like it to be simple, right? So what we would like is to one of our devices say, hey, I need to get enrolled. So it contacts the provider and asks for an enrollment certificate. Once they go through the process of verifying that the device has been certified to their satisfaction and meets all the requirements, then they would be able to contact the root certificate authority and receive an enrollment certificate. Once the device receives that enrollment certificate, then what would eventually happen is the device would need application search, and we're going to talk more about this later, but the application search would then come straight down from the root CA through the intermediate pseudonym, the location of obscure proxy, and then into the devices. And then off on the side, any misbehavior that was detected by the system would be identified and would be also pushed down through that same mechanism to the devices, so that we would know who the bad actors are in the environment. The reality is probably going to be way more complicated. There's going to have to be policy established at some level about how SCMS is going to operate. Will we have a single root approach? Will we have a multi-root approach? And even in a single root approach, as you get more and more complex, you can see the idea is that the different devices will have different types of interfaces. Everybody will still have to enroll. Everybody will still have to get application certification. Misbehavior detection is probably not going to be very straightforward, because trying to figure that out and get that information back and verify that, yeah, these are misbehaving devices, and taking their certificates and invalidating them is going to be a real challenge for everybody. So much more complex in doing this. I think we're at the infancy stage right now. The pilots themselves are implementing SCMS as we speak. Here in Tampa, we're using a commercial provider to do that work, and we are downloading certificates actually at the manufacturing facility for our onboard units, and then we are pushing that, installing those in vehicles, and our RSUs have all been provisioned and all have certificates and are operating in the signed environment. So we are doing testing and some live testing of our stuff here with the certificates, and it's working pretty well. So SCMS guarantees trust, and that's really what this means. It doesn't guarantee that your data that you receive is going to be valid, but it does guarantee the fact that the message came from a trusted source and that you can decrypt the message and use it safely. It will not protect your infrastructure. This is not like a firewall as such. These are just certificates that are signed to each message as it's sent and received, and then encrypted and decrypted. And you really don't want to have an SCMS if you have insecure infrastructure. If you have the ability, if there's a lot of vulnerabilities in your network or in your infrastructure, that presents opportunities for people to hack in and bad actors to be established and to do some things that we don't want to see happen. So if you do SPaT without SCMS, what's the implications of that? Well, if there are applications out there, and there are now, people are deploying onboard units. I know there's a few places around the country that have RSUs that simply are just listening, and they're seeing 100 or so onboard units come by their RSU every week. So there's people out there doing things with the technology that we really that aren't telling anybody. And so if you're not securing your messages, then you're not going to be trusted. So your SPaT message would be ignored, your MAP message would be ignored, and if you're doing anything with transit signal priority, your signal status message would be ignored. And if you don't start in the beginning with security, making sure that you've got your privacy well preserved is going to be more and more challenging as you're trying to retrofit essentially your security on your messaging after you've rolled it all out. On the flip side of that, RSUs will be able to receive any signed messages, like a basic safety message or a signal request message. However, they won't be able to do anything with them, or I take that back. They could do something with them, but they won't know if they're from a trusted source. So if you have any apps on your RSU that's actually trying to do something other than just broadcasting out SPaT and MAP, you really need to have your security in place so that you can decrypt the messages and know that this is coming from a secure and trusted device. So let's talk about in a little more detail where the application certificates come from. So first off, you have to have what I'm calling a certified RSU. In today's environment, what that means, when you talk to most any SCMS provider, will tell you that the device needs to be Omni-Air certified. And so once you have your device or the device is certified by Omni-Air or other entities that might exist down the road, then you can actually go and request your enrollment certificate from your SCMS provider. Once you get that, you have to, every device, RSU, OBU, has to have a hardware security module, and those certificates are stored in there. And that's where they're kept under lock and key safely so that no one can access them. Once you receive your enrollment certificate, it's also associated with what we're calling PSIDs, or Provider Service Identifier. And you may have one or more of these depending on how many applications you have, because each of the connected vehicle applications are actually grouped together and categorized according to PSIDs. So there can be identified, PSID identifies the type of applications that you might be going to use. And then, so that's how you're enrolled. Now what you need to do is you need to actually get application certificates. So what happens then is the RSU makes a connection with the SCMS, typically through IPv6. I know many of us don't have IPv6, so what we end up doing is creating a tunnel through IPv4 to be able to connect to the SCMS. You let them know, you identify yourself with your enrollment certificate, and then the SCMS will send you its application certificates. And somewhere along the way, you've decided how many of those you want. Do you want a week's worth? Do you want a year's worth? Do you want a month's worth? And how often you're going to refresh all of that. So those are stored, and I apologize, this should be just one bullet, but the application certificates are stored in the hardware security module, just like the enrollment certificate is. And again, these things have to be refreshed periodically because either they're too old or you're using them all and you need to request more. So what about RSUs that may not be connected all the time to your network or don't want to connect all the time to the SCMS? What do you do? And so there's some thinking that has to go on and about how you want to do this, but most importantly, you could do this by creating an environment in your traffic management center or in some place like that where you can have an appliance essentially that is allowed to exist in there. It must have a hardware security module, and you must have the right conditions set up so that you can do this. And then what happens is this device in your traffic management center would do the enrollment, and it would request the certificates and hold them all inside its hardware security module inside the traffic management center. And then when an RSU actually needs to get a certificate to, for example, broadcast SPaT or broadcast a traveler information message, it would request a certificate from the device, and then the RSU would sign that message and send it out. The advantage of that is all your certificates are in one place. You don't have them spread out all over your RSU network. The disadvantage is you have to always come and request the certificate, and if you have a problem with communication or something, you might have an issue there. So it's just one of those things that you have to look at. I know, for example, the New York pilot is doing it this way, where they're having an appliance inside their TMC, so that might be something if you're interested in to talk with them about. The Tampa folks, we're doing it the other way. We're putting all our certificates out on the RSU. So what are some of the limitations of SCMS? And you've heard me say this multiple times already, but just to reiterate it, it guarantees trust and source of the message. So it guarantees that who is sending the message is a trusted source, and you can rely on that. But it again does not guarantee the contents of the message to be valid. That has to be done by the application once it gets the message and working on it. Again, we've talked about this, but enrollment certificates can only be obtained by certified devices, and again, certified by approved certification labs. And as I said, right now, Omniair is the entity that does that. Omniair has three certification labs now that you could send your devices to have them certified. It doesn't protect your infrastructure. This isn't a firewall or anything like that. These are certificates that are signed and sent with the message, just like you would do through your internet browser when you're doing secure transactions, for example, making a payment or something like that. And then the hardware security module is really not I hear we call it, it's not your do-it-yourself, or it's not an off-the-shelf solution. This is a very complex thing, and right now the requirement is to be FIPS Level 2 certified, and I wouldn't be surprised if they actually went to FIPS Level 3, because it just because what's held inside that module is all the information about the certificates, and if that gets out, then there's a potential for obviously some bad things to happen. So how do we protect RSU data? Well, you have to know how your RSU is communicating with your signal controller. Is it over is it an Ethernet connection, serial connection, however that works? You need to know how you're communicating with your traffic management center, and then what information are you actually providing between the two sources. And so, do you encrypt data from, for example, from the RSU to the traffic management center, so that in case somebody, if you're going wirelessly, for example, tries to hack into that and steal it, or you just have to make business decisions about that. And of course, the more secure it becomes, the more overhead you have and the more bandwidth it takes. So if you're fiber connected, that's one thing. If you're wireless connected, that's another. How can you keep unauthorized network traffic from, how can you detect and block unauthorized network traffic? That's something you just need to think about. We'll see on the next slide a couple of suggestions for that. And then how can software tampering be prevented, detected, and restored? You've got to think about those kind of things. Everybody has the number 6 key to the signal cabinet. We all joke about that, but the reality is that your cabinet needs to be secure so that people can't get into there and get to the signal controller or the RSU or any of the devices. So protecting the networks, one way would be to have a separate network for the SCMS and then one for everything else. You want to monitor all your data on the SCMS network just to make sure that there's that there's nothing going on, there's nothing funny business happening or anything like that. Of course, we definitely want to make use of virtual private networks to help secure and put the devices all in one network where they can only communicate. And then you have to assume that your field cabinet is going to get compromised. And so you want to make sure that you don't have any open ports out there that people could plug into. You want to have make tamper proof covers for the ports, or be able to know when someone's getting in your cabinet. For example, the door switch would activate an alarm back at the TMC. And then really, you need to get with your field technicians, because they're the ones that are going to be the ones going out there and looking at the equipment and opening the doors and trying to figure out what happened. They're really your first responders, so they need to be educated. They need to know what's happening, and they really need to be so they can take care of anything that they need to when they get there. And finally, let's just talk about some things that I think are important from an early adopter perspective. One is be aware of the risk, and what do I mean by that? Well, here I'm saying the risk of setting up your SPaT challenge without security versus setting it up with security. How much are you really risking there? Is it worth that time to do that, or is it time to go ahead and consider, let's get our security in place? Reach out to the other SPaT challenge sites, see what they're doing, and of course reach out to the 3CV pilots. We all have experience now with SCMS and stuff, and I think we'll all be happy to share our thoughts with that. And then, start talking to these commercial vendors that are out there to see what they have to offer and ideas that they have. They're all very willing to come and sit down and have some discussions with you, because they're all looking to sell their product to you. So they'd be happy to do that. And then finally, I think, in my opinion, that you should be doing SCMS now rather than later. Because if you wait, the challenges of having to do that could become onerous in terms of you're going to have to set up secure pipes for your RSUs to be able to communicate with the SCMS. You might even have to take them down and take them into a secure location, depending on the networks that you've got set up. So think about what you have now and how you could easily set that up. So.